Hi, I'm Kate Taylor. I'm a podcast producer, audio exec, and founder of the Feast Collective production network. Really is all about those personal connections, and it's all about the relationships that you build and the trust. Living and working in a space where you're frightened and where you're trying to be all things to all people at all hours of the day is quite isolated and quite a stressful experience. So I started Feast Collective, and it's about confronting the feast and famine cycle of freelance work.
It's another episode of Being Freelance, and this is supported by and recorded using Riverside. Not just for getting high quality audio and video for podcasts, but also, man, check out the live streaming. Yes, to sites like YouTube or LinkedIn, but also for webinars. You don't have to necessarily stream them as such, but you can record them, so you can have like a link for an audience to join you. They can chat, they can interact with the webinar. You and your guest will be recorded in high quality, including the screen sharing. And then you've got the editor at the back end of Riverside, as soon as you've stopped going live, that you can repurpose your content with. It's an absolute time saver, and I'd love you to take a look and see how it could benefit you and your freelance business. Go to beingfreelance.com/Riverside. It's free to get started, but use the code BEINGFreelance to save 15%. But right now we're going to find out what it's like being freelance for podcast producer Kate Taylor.
Don't tell me you don't suddenly wake up in the morning and go, oh God, is it all going to disappear?
Yeah, there's Kate. Her story coming up in a moment. It's a goodie. This, then, as I record it, this week marks the 10th anniversary of the Being Freelance podcast, which seems crazy to me. I had no idea what I'd started, both where the podcast took us, the live podcast, the course for new freelancers, the non-employee of the week awards, the book club, the live Q&As, and of course the Being Freelance community, which I just love hanging out in. I'd love to see you there too. But it all started by hitting record and putting this podcast out 10 years ago. Over 300 episodes, guests from around the world, and it wouldn't happen if they didn't speak to me and if you didn't listen. So thanks to them for sharing and for you for listening. I really do appreciate it. Who knows what the next 10 years will hold? 10 years? That's a long time, isn't it? Anyway, I'm kind of glad we didn't used to film these back then, because then I could see quite how much I've changed. But anyway, we do film these. These go out on YouTube and Spotify in video format, also at beingfreelance.com, or of course, as always, just an audio version. I'll tell you more about the community later on, and the fact that I'm giving cake away to celebrate the 10-year anniversary. Because, hey, you've got to have cake if it's the 10th birthday, but I don't want to keep it all to myself. You've got to share it with your friends, right? So I'll tell you more about that later. But right now, let's crack on with this week's episode. We're off to London to chat to podcast producer Kate Taylor. As ever, how about we get started hearing how you got started being freelance?
Sure thing. And I love this, by the way. As a professional podcaster, I have to say I love what you do. And one of the things that I love about what you do, just to turn the tables on you right from the start, one of the things I love about what you do is that you have a structured framework, and within which anything goes. And I think that combination of rules and freedom is the secret to a great podcast, and the secret to a happy work-life balance, because you've got the stuff that you always do, so you can do it on automatic pilot and you don't have to think about it. And then within that, you've got freedom to play, to take things how they go. And so I love that you always start with this question. It's a really good question. And generally everything, you know, about the show that you do, where you have these kind of set points, so the listener knows what to expect, but within those points, the listener could go anywhere, and it's a kind of treasure garden. So well done you for starters.
That's very kind.
But to answer the question, I never wanted to be freelance. I've been freelance for about 20 years, and I never wanted it to begin with. I wanted a proper job. I wanted to go to an office and, you know, probably wear tights. You know, that's what I wanted from my working life, because I was quite a nervous graduate. You know, when we entered the world of work at my generation, it was a scary place, and I wanted stability, for God's sake. And so I went into the advertising industry because I thought that would be a great combination of creativity and sort of proper jobness. And it was not what I wanted to do. And one of the things that I'm most pleased about actually was that after about 4 years, I decided it was not for me, and I took the plunge and I left. And it was quite a scary thing to do at the time. And I remember the head of HR going, "So what job are you going to?" And I was like, "Oh, well, I actually don't have a job to go to." And they were like, "Oh, okay."
Oh, it's that bad.
Yeah. Oh, well, good luck. So it was scary, but it was the right thing to do. And I remember at the time thinking, you know, am I going to be telling my poor, poverty-stricken imaginary children in 15 years' time, you know, "Well, I'm sorry, dear, I know that other people go on holiday, but mummy took some bad decisions in her early 20s and it worked out." But it was a sort of a seismic sort of blow up in that, I decided advertising wasn't for me. My parents got divorced. I split up from my boyfriend, and I decided I wanted to be a famous actor. So I left advertising. I auditioned for drama school, didn't get in, lucky escape, and then started going, right, what am I going to do next? And I thought I wanted to go into TV, and I was applying for jobs and was trying to mug up. And in my prep, I realised I didn't actually watch a lot of TV, and I didn't actually really like a lot of TV. And it was quite arduous doing this prep for interviews and so on. And I suddenly realized what I did listen to all the time and love, and would have been much easier if I was doing interviews about that, was radio. Podcasts didn't exist then. And so I realized that that's what I should be doing. And I think what's interesting about that was that it wasn't obvious. It wasn't like I wanted to be an audio producer from the beginning. But that's what I gradually became. And I became a freelancer because the audio industry runs very largely on freelancers. It's very project based. And so even now, where it's a much more professional and bigger industry than it was when I started, it runs very, very largely on projects. And so they need to sort of suddenly pull in lots of people, and then things kind of shrink. So it does rely largely on freelancers. And I sold my first program idea to a production company which is still going very strong, winning loads of awards, called Whistledown Productions. And I always shout out to them because I'm incredibly grateful to David Preston and Whistledown for giving me the chance. And it was my program idea. We sold it in to BBC Radio 4, and it was a searing expose of the children's book, The Very Hungry Caterpillar. And I made a 30-minute doc about that. And that was the first kind of thing that I made, the first proper show that I ever made.
Wow. We're all now Googling as to whether we can listen to that documentary.
I think you can, actually. I think they did it again on BBC Extra, like fairly recently. Anyway, it's great.
So does that mean, so it was less about perhaps finding what we might think of as clients now, but rather going to companies and pitching yourself as well as pitching ideas? Like, how did it look for you getting your first jobs? Yes,
it was about building relationships with the companies that could kind of get you a platform, I suppose. What we always said at the time, and is still to a certain extent true in the industry, is that your ideas are your currency. It's an exciting and creative kind of way to live, where you're constantly looking at things and going, Scott's expedition to the Antarctic, could there be a program in that? There's some, that's our dog.
Dogs barking at neighbours. Could there be
exactly that. Yeah. So that was kind of the way that I was living at the time. But it becomes about your ideas, but also crucially, and I think this is the thing which has lasted through my professional career, is that it really is all about those personal connections. And it's all about the relationships that you build and the trust, and people who think that you are good, nice, interesting, and want to work with you again. And I think that that was what's kind of stood me in good stead through this long accidental freelance career.
How were you meeting those people though? And maybe that's changed. So like, how were you and how are you like contacting people and then maintaining those relationships?
So lots of cold calling to begin with and following up. And by the time The Hungry Caterpillar came out, it's funny to be talking about this given that it was so long ago, but by the time The Hungry Caterpillar came out, I did a mail out to a physical mail out, because that's when it was. But I did a physical mail out to all of the people that I had talked to try and get work or advice or placements or work experience, whatever it was. I sent everybody a tiny caterpillar and not a real one, I hasten to add, and a CV and a little note just saying, you know, thank you so much for your advice and help. And, you know, my first show is going to be on Radio 4 in a couple of weeks' time or whatever it was. So that was a good example of sort of following up on the cold calls and the relationships that I had built. I probably got a bit lazier at doing that kind of stuff over the years. And also now, you know, I'm more established. And so the relationships are in existence and work tends to come to me. I get recommended by word of mouth and so on, which is really nice. But, you know, we can always do better, couldn't we? We should always be posting more on our socials and reaching out for coffees to various people. And I'm no exception. I should absolutely be doing more of that following up stuff. Perhaps not sending people tiny pom-pom caterpillars, but
I don't know. By the nature of what you were doing, was it the sort of thing where you would be working for a set amount of time and then that would come to an end? And if so, how would you have work lined up further down the line?
Yes, it tends to be very project-based, and then stuff comes to an end, and then you feel like you're staring into the abyss. And my partner repeatedly says to me, and has said to me, because we've been together for about as long as I've been freelancing, he says it always works out. Something always comes up. You always say you're never going to work again after the end of this project. And you always do. So shut up, basically. But that fear is also one of the reasons behind why I expanded what I do from pure audio production into running the Feast Collective network, which is a network of freelancers. So producers, researchers, sound designers, audio professionals, essentially. And one of the reasons that I did that was because the fear of the black hole, that I would never work again, was doing two things. Firstly, it was making me say yes to projects that I should have said no to, either because I didn't have capacity or because I just didn't want to do them. They didn't align with my values. I wasn't the right person. They weren't the right project, whatever. So it was making me take projects that I didn't want to. And it was also putting just an incredible kind of strain on my creative brain of just living and working in a space where you're frightened and where you're trying to be all things to all people at all hours of the day is quite an isolated and quite a stressful experience. And my argument would be that a lot of freelancers exist in that space and that you don't do your best work when you're in that space. It's not a very expansive or creative mindset. And so I started Feast Collective, and it is called Feast Collective because it's about kind of confronting the feast and famine cycle of freelance work. And I started it in order to build my network, in order to not be so isolated, in order to kind of take that panicky brain offline a little bit so that I could, if I had a problem or I was worried about something or I needed a sounding board, I have my network that I can call on. But also a little bit so that I could manage my own brain, in that I was finding at a certain point in the podcasting boom, I was getting more work than I could do, which is a nice problem to have. But as I said, I wasn't able to say no to stuff. So then I was working all hours, and that was no good, not a creative space. And I found that rather than saying no to work, it was more easy for me to say, I can't do it, but actually I know a great person because of my 15 years in the industry or whatever it is. I know a great person who could. And to pass the work on was much more psychologically possible for me, and also maybe future-proof my own precarious freelance career a little bit, because, you know, they might scratch my back at some point in the future. So that was the kind of the beginnings of Feast Collective, if you like.
So you've gone with the word collective. So you weren't, because you could have thought, oh, I'll start my own company. You know, as well, you have a company, but you know what I mean? I'll start like a production company, an agency. I'll have other people so that we can take all these jobs on. But you didn't?
So yes, it's a really good question. The way that it works is essentially Feast Collective is like a very small production company. After my career of, you know, making lots of high profile stuff for Radio 4, lots of docs, lots of award-winning things on a kind of a huge range of subjects, with the podcasting industry kind of going into overdrive and there being more and more stuff out there, I started making podcasts for, you know, a range of clients, for universities, commercial brands, newspapers, whoever it might be. And I still produce audio. I still, you know, I'm actually working on a series called Legacy at the moment with Goalhanger Productions, which is very fun because Goalhanger are going great guns and Legacy is a fabulous thing to be working on. But at the same time, I started Feast, and it works, as I say, like a production company, a very teeny production company. But the word collective is a small IOU, I guess. It's a small promise to myself that's a little flag about what the focus and point of this production company is, which is that we are not necessarily specializing in a particular kind of work. We're not trying to grow hugely. The point and the focus of Feast is the freelancers that we work with. And everything that we do alongside the kind of traditional things of a production company is around building that network and supporting that network. So we do things like a regular coffee drop-in session on a Monday morning via Zoom, so that our freelancers from, you know, as far afield as Liverpool or Cornwall or, you know, God forbid, South London, you know, can drop in. We can start the week with a coffee. It's a place for networking, brainstorming, whinging, talking about what you got for Christmas, you know, whatever it might be. But it means that you're not on your own. But we also do more explicitly work-focused things. We run subsidized training. We run masterclass talks. We run brainstorming sessions when there are kind of commissioning rounds going on at the BBC and other things. We've just started something called the January Plank Challenge, where everybody has to do a plank every day, and we all just text each other a little tick when it's done. So, I mean, not a million miles away, actually, from some of the things that you do with your community, Steve. And to get back to your question, while we are not technically a collective in the sense of kind of sharing everything about the company at the moment, it's an aspiration. And it reflects our priorities and hopefully the sort of direction of travel. So I hope that makes some sort of sense.
I love it. It's so it's part company, but it's part community to break up that isolation of freelance. It's part like networking with your peers as well. But would you perhaps pitch, you know, you've been brainstorming ideas. Would you pitch and almost act like a company where you would take on a project and you, Kate, would hire the people around you, in which case would you invoice, you know, as Feast Collective, or would you let everybody invoice separately? Like, what would that be like if you do that?
Well, for starters, we don't pitch. We might do at some point in the future, but currently we don't pitch. And the reason we don't pitch is we don't need to. And it is incredibly demanding of resources and emotional, psychological energy. I've spent so much of my career writing proposals for program ideas that take up huge amounts of time, and then you get a 2-word refusal with no. It's one of the problems of the industry actually is that you will kind of pour your heart and soul into developing an idea, and then get a kind of a computer says no answer without any learning, any sort of useful feedback at all. And that is often a frustrating thing about the industry. I think it's probably changing, but it has been a tricky thing. But the main reason that we don't pitch is that we don't need to. We get enough work coming in just from word of mouth and from recommendations. But what we do, and this is actually a good example of how the collective works, is that there are members of the Feast Collective who do pitch, and they might pitch under their own company identities, for example. And we will facilitate brainstorming sessions where people will kind of workshop ideas, say for a BBC Radio 4 commissioning round. And one of the great things about those is that they're very inclusive. So you'll have people who are very early career, people who've been doing it for 25 years, who can kind of share different perspectives, different expertise, and kind of help craft each other's ideas. And then I will matchmake that person's idea with that person who wants to pitch it. And when there's a sort of alignment of the kinds of material that they make, we'll put them in touch with each other and they can pitch through another feastie. So that's how that works. But when we do make projects ourselves as Feast, yes, I generally exec them. So yes, I would recruit whatever's needed for the project: a producer, researcher, sound designer, editor, mixer, whatever it might be. Manage them, liaise with the client, and handle the invoicing side of things as well, which I have to say is not my favourite part of it.
So whilst you wouldn't pitch for it, it may be that work does go through Feast itself. Yes.
So for example, at the moment, we are about to start production on the 3rd series of the Farrow and Ball podcast. I'm sure your very discerning listeners around the world will know Farrow and Ball, the cult paint and paper brand. And they came to us because we made a hit, we still make it actually, a hit interior design show called The Great Indoors. And they knew the show, they knew that we were making it. And so they reached out to us and said, look, we've never made a podcast before. Would you like to make our first podcast? And we were like, absolutely. It's such incredibly rich territory. And so we developed the first series, not last year, the year before. It's called The Chromologist. And it's a great show. And so that project came to us. I put together a team to make it. And we developed the idea, the structure, the format, and we are, it's been going really well. We're starting on production for season 3 at the moment.
That's so cool. So the Feast and the Famine fear has gone, thanks to the collective.
It never goes, Steve. It never goes. You must know that. Don't tell me you don't suddenly wake up in the morning and go, oh God, is it all going to disappear? No, I think it never goes, but you get better at talking yourself down, and you get better at, looking back and saying, I've been here before. I know how this goes. It'll be okay. I do think that with the industry that I'm in, there's an enormous amount of change and flux, and the audio industry. And, I thought when I left advertising and went into radio, I thought I was, going into a tiny little sleepy backwater industry. And then podcasting came along and suddenly audio is cool, and, we've got work coming out of my ears, and it's amazing. And the way that the industry has kind of expanded and then contracted and changed at a rate of knots over the last few years is very exciting and sometimes quite nerve-wracking. And you just need to sort of hold your nerve, and pivot, I think, as well. I think probably like a lot of freelancers, I have a lot of different sorts of things that I do. I'm execing podcasts. I'm organising January plank challenges for the Feast Collective network. I'm trying to get my head around the latest piece of tech, which is not my strong point. And every now and then I need to step back and reassess and go, oh, I haven't done some of that for a bit, or I'm getting a bit scared about doing that, or I'm looking a bit light on that, and maybe I should do some more of that. In fact, I was saying last night, I feel like I haven't done kind of frontline producing for a bit. I've done quite a lot of sort of senior execing, but the last time I was the kind of lead producer on a major series was a series I made for Audible called Stories of the Stalked, which was about a woman's sort of real life experience of the kind of horrors of being stalked. And we made a 6-part series about it. And it was very challenging for all the reasons that you might imagine, but very fulfilling and really interesting. And that was a few years ago now. And I'm starting to feel like I should make a big thing again. Not least because one of the Feasties had brilliant reviews for a series that she's just released on the Pitcairn trials, which she made for a different company. She didn't make it through us, but she's a member of Feast and she's absolutely made up about it. It's been doing really, really well. But interestingly, whenever shows are reviewed, they don't mention the producer's name. You know, they might mention the presenter, they might at a push mention the production company, but they generally don't mention the producer's name. And so one of the things that I would like to do for Feast is, you know, get our social media a bit more geared towards publicising when our producers do excellent things, even if they're for other people, which is one of the things that makes us a slightly odd production company, because we're publicising other people's work, but because it's a Feast person's work. So I kind of currently always have this sort of tension between, oh, I should have made the Pitcairn trials, to, oh, we should really be working out a way where we can like have a structure where we can get more publicity for Lucy, for her brilliant, Lucy Ditchmont, by the way. Well, we should get more publicity for Lucy Ditchmont and her amazing work on the Pitcairn trials project. So, you know, sometimes I feel like I've got too much bubbling in my head, but I try and think of it as a good thing.
And I just love that sense of community within it, though. This, you know, these people could be your competitors, put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think, I mean, I don't know if you found this with making this podcast, but I think the audio community is, perhaps because it's still quite a baby industry, but I think it's largely a very friendly, positive and supportive industry. You know, most of the people who are in this business are not in it to make a big buck, because there aren't very many people doing that. We can't all be Stephen Bartlett. And most people are doing this because they love it and, you know, respect other people who love it as well. Mm. And also I think there is increasing awareness of how important community is. I think of all the ways that the world is going to hell in a handcart at the moment. I think there is a real acknowledgement of how important human connections and community are to quality of life. And I think that is something that's really changed over my career, actually. I think there is much more priority given to living a good life with good people, you know, not necessarily just making it at all costs.
Speaking of living a good life, you mentioned work-life balance earlier, about rules and freedom. How is it for you?
I think it's pretty good. One of the things I really like about freelancing is the flexibility. You know, I've got reasonably small children. I do school pick up and drop off most days. And that's one of the things that I love about my work. You know, I work from home, usually, not always, but most of the time. And I think sometimes you need to be strict with yourself in terms of really focusing on on a project. You can get too busy sort of flitting between emails and doing the washing up and then putting a wash on, and then I'll just make a quick call. But when you've got to actually do a kind of in-depth edit or a deep bit of research or whatever it might be, you need to be kind of strict with yourself about putting the personal life away, because I'm sure it's familiar to everybody, but the boundaries between work and life blur in a way that can be very positive, but can sometimes, needs a bit of a firm hand sometimes, I think.
Back with Kate's story in a moment. So much more to come from her. So yes, the Being Freelance podcast turns 10. I've actually made it onto the front cover of Freelancer magazine. If you don't get it, you should. Go to search Freelancer magazine and make sure you're subscribed. It's well worth it. And those sweet glossy pages, you know the drill. Thank you very much to them for making me their cover star. That's very nice. It is 10 years and we're celebrating with cake in the Being Freelance community. I'm going to be posting it to BFFs, and if you'd like a slice of the action, there are T's and C's and all of that. It's very dry. Not the cake, the T's and C's. Just head to the community. Go to beingfreelance.com and come say hi. Come say hi. This could be the year, right? That you surround yourself with loads of other people who get what it's like being freelance. Yes, there's all the other stuff like the live podcasts and the co-working, but it's that sense of not being alone, that ability to sense check, to celebrate, to show what you're up to commiserate when it's not going quite so well. It's invaluable. And you should see the amount that people refer each other and hire each other. So let's face it, we're businesses and it's a great place to get work. Go to beingfreelance.com, click on community, and I hope to see you in there. And I realise you could be listening to this 10 years from now, but if you do listen to it as it goes out at the start of 2025, there could even be some cake in it for you. Okay, let's get back to Kate's story. Earlier when you were talking about how, you might pitch for something and then you put a lot of effort into that and then you don't hear back. How you deal with that rejection. So the rejection that you might face along in your freelance career, how you've dealt with that, how you stay positive.
Such an interesting question, isn't it? Especially with ideas. They feel so personal. And so rejection feels so personal. It feels like it's a rejection of you. I'll tell you a story about, I used to produce a series on Radio 4 called Feedback, which is like the points of view for radio. It's like the listener response program. And it's a really tricky thing to make because you are on the BBC making a program criticising the BBC and trying to get interviews with people about criticising the BBC, or trying to get interviews with producers and program makers, and nobody wants to do it because nobody wants to be hauled over the coals. But the producer that I was working on it with is a producer called Karen, and she used to do this thing, and I didn't tell her about it for years, but we work together now. She's in the Feast Network, and I have since told her about it. But she just used to do this incredible poker face when things were going really, really badly, or, a guest was kicking off, or we were up against a deadline, or something had gone wrong with the tech and we'd lost the whole program, or whatever it might be. She would just have this sort of poker face. And I would go home and tell my partner about it, weeping and, oh God, it's so awful. I messed up, or this has been so stressful, or I'm really worried about this. And Karen's just incredible. She's just got this sort of poker face on. And we developed this term of Karen face, which is just how you deal with difficult people, difficult situations, rejection, horror, pain, sadness, and misery. I suppose it's a form of fake it till you make it, is that you just put on your Karen face and you try not to take it personally. You just put the face on, the face takes it, the face is nodding, and you just put the feelings away and get on with the job. And I think there's something of that in the way of I suppose it's about depersonalizing the rejection. Rather than putting your bleeding heart out there for everyone to see and going, but this hurts so much, how could you reject me and my ideas? It's just about going, okay, next thing. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, there's some Karens out there now who Another thing I wanted to ask you is, because you mentioned awards.
So many awards. So many. They're just coming out of my ears.
They're good insulation, right? How important you feel awards are or have been, the difference that they might make.
It's so interesting. So I think I was a bit naive about it. I won a program that I made with Whistledown Productions, called Letters from Guantanamo, which was about Sami al-Hajj, only journalist incarcerated in Guantanamo Bay, won a Sony Gold back when they were called the Sonys, which was the sort of the industry award. And I just didn't really capitalize on it at all. I think I didn't know how. I didn't know that I should. It was quite a while ago, and I sort of expected it to, I expected sort of people to do that for me, or people to just find me. And I was sort of a bit pathetic about it. But equally, I think that was slightly symptomatic of how the industry was at the time. It was just a little bit more vague. And another program that I made won a New York Festivals Award, which again, now if I won a New York Festivals Award, I would be shouting about it everywhere. But I think there just wasn't, LinkedIn wasn't really a thing. Social media was much, much less self-promoty. I think I didn't really know how to make a fuss about it. Whereas now, How to Own the Room, which is a podcast that we make about women and public speaking, it was nominated for 3 independent podcast awards, in 2024. And I instantly put you get a little image, a little icon. I put that on my email signature. I talked about it on the Instagram. I talked about it on LinkedIn. And similarly, that program that I was telling you about, stalking, that was nominated for an ARIA. It was nominated for a Peabody Award. And again, you feel like an idiot doing it, but there are platforms now, and there are ways of doing it, and there are tones of voice that you can use just to be I think the way to do it is to be quite straight and not to do the kind of humble, I'm so humbled and honoured, but just to do look, this is great. I'm really pleased. Look. And so I'm much better, I think, at doing that now. Your question was about whether it matters. And I think lots of things win awards that aren't any good. So there's that. But it boosts your profile. It helps put you in people's heads, and it helps them give you a second glance. So it just puts you on their desk, and it makes them go, oh, might be worth investigating. And I think that is useful. But I also think there is the recognition is nice. A lot of what people do in this industry is toiling away by themselves on things that they care enormously about that then sink without trace. And I think having some people clap you and give you a bit of plastic is really valuable. And, I'm absolutely not gonna knock that at all. On the awards thing and on, I suppose on that note of profile, one of the things that we did at Feast a few years ago, which I'm really proud of, is we lobbied / worked collaboratively with the British Podcast Awards to launch the first ever podcast climate award. And the climate emergency is something that I'm really, really scared about. I mean, as I'm talking to you, there are wildfires raging in California. We saw the horrific floods in Valencia last year. The claws of the climate emergency are getting sharper and closer, and we should all be doing everything that we can, including as communicators and freelancers in our personal lives, in our work lives, in our lives as citizens and voters, to try and get some handle on this runaway global heating. And one of the things that I thought that we could do at Feast was to get an award that would recognise and reward and promote the excellent work being done by podcasts in the kind of climate, environmental sustainability space. So we bothered the British Podcast Awards to give them their credit. They were really receptive and interested. We did a survey, we put together a case, and they launched the very first ever BPA Climate Award, and then all the other awards followed suit. So there are now sustainability awards and climate awards and things coming out of the woodwork, which
Awesome.
is absolutely brilliant. And that's something that I'm really proud of. And that is a thing that awards can do, is raise things up, raise the profile of things, bring things to people's attention.
Amazing. Also, by the way, just as a sidebar, your email signature use is excellent. You explain, not everyone's going to get an email from you. What do you have in your email signature?
In my email signature, I'll read it out. It says, fly less, eat less meat and dairy, change to green energy, and check out if your bank is funding fossil fuels. And the green energy and the bank are hyperlinks. And the reason that I've put that on there is that the climate emergency is huge. It's huge. It's scary. No one wants to think about it. No one's quite sure what to do. And there in my email are some really simple, concrete things that you can do today. Maybe you could put some links in the show notes, Steve.
And then you have your business stuff beneath that. So that's at the top, and beneath that.
I like to integrate them. And, you know, one of the things that we do at Feast is that we try and put our money where our mouth is. And, you know, I will give discounted advice and work to people making podcasts in the climate and sustainability space. I'm in fact about to do a development workshop with a new client next week, who's in this space, and I've already given her a bunch of stuff for free and will continue to do that because I want to make life easier for people doing the right thing. But also it means that we say no to stuff sometimes as well. You know, I've been asked to do things which involve flying, and it's hard to say no. And I'm not saying that I would never say yes, but I think it's all too easy for people to go, oh, great. Yeah. Trip to New York. Rather than going, do I need to waste all of that carbon? There's about a squillion excellent producers in New York, and I could, you know, remote produce them, and we could do it that way and feel better about ourselves. So, yeah.
Nice. Now, Kate, I always do this thing where I ask for 3 facts about yourself to make 2 true, 1 a lie. Let me figure out the lie. What do you have for me?
You always do this. You see, this is your structure. I love it. It's really great. Honestly, listeners, he's a great podcaster. You should listen to this guy.
Sorry, I'm just thinking that has to go on my website and make a note as a testimonial.
Definitely.
Okay, sorry, go on.
So here are the 3 then. Number 1, I was briefly stolen by monkeys as a child. Number 2, I was shipwrecked in the Pacific. And number 3, I persuaded a plane full of strangers to pay my way home.
Wow, these are brilliant.
Thank you. I did try.
Let's start with the plane one. That was number 3 because I think we all want to end with the monkeys. So what, you got stranded and persuaded a plane of strangers to pay for you to get... I don't understand. What?
Before I started university, so I was a teenager, I was traveling and teaching English in Russia, and my visa ran out. And I had been told it wouldn't be a problem. When I got to the airport, it was a problem. And I stood in the middle of a departure lounge full of people and said, ladies and gentlemen, I have to get back to London tonight. If there's any way that anyone could lend me any money, I promise I will pay you back.
This feels like a film.
If anyone's listening and wants to pay me for the rights.
The rights. Okay, you again shipwrecked, a film. So you were shipwrecked in the Pacific.
So a friend of mine has a boat, and we 5 of us were helping to sail it down the coast, and we hit some freak weather. And we got knocked down and our boom was broken. Yeah.
Down the coast of where?
Oh gosh, the west coast of America.
I'm definitely not doing north, east, south, west. Trying to figure out where the Pacific is. Damn, that is the west, isn't it? Okay. What did you have to do though? Did you stay on the boat? Did you get to I shipwrecked it. I know you've deliberately used the language to make it dramatic, but what did happen? How did you get rescued?
Well, it was very scary, but we made contact with the local coast guards. We thought that they would just sort of swoop in and rescue us, but that apparently is more dangerous than just keeping on sailing in bad weather in a compromised boat. Trying to get people off a boat is very risky. So we just kept on sailing until the weather improved and we managed to limp into port. And when we did, all of the local fishermen had been listening to us, keeping in touch with the Coast Guard on their shortwave radios. They'd been listening to us all night. So we were like local celebrities. Everyone wanted to come and meet us.
Okay. You were briefly kidnapped by monkeys as a child. What?
We used to live in Tanzania. My family, I was brought up abroad, and we were on safari. I think a team of baboons carried me off.
I mean, how did they get you back from the baboons? And please don't write in telling me a baboon isn't a monkey or something like that. I don't want it. Not with the technicalities here.
That could be the lie. Maybe that's the lie. It's not. Baboon is
technically
not
a monkey.
I think there was just some chasing and shouting.
You think that was?
I was very small, Steve. Yeah, I was very small.
This would be the story that is retold every Christmas. Oh, thank goodness! Oh, we should have invited the baboons to join us. Like that is the thing which becomes the truth because it's constant. Oh, now is this the lie? Okay, the plane.
You do make your life difficult for yourself, don't you? With this wheeze of yours.
The Russian plane. No, that sounds true. The shipwreck, I was starting to think wasn't true. You were really, no disrespect, faltering on that story as if you couldn't even imagine being shipwrecked. But then suddenly it picked up speed. The clouds cleared. You were heading to the port. You were celebrities. I don't know. Maybe you were then getting carried away. You picked up your story. So maybe that is a lie, but you finally got caught up with something that could have been true. Then the monkeys is sparing on detail that you're blaming on your age, but I feel like would have been coloured in by those who were there. You didn't even seem entirely convinced they were baboons. Okay, I think the plane is true. So shipwreck or monkeys. The monkeys fell apart, and I can't decide whether you're just playing this very cleverly and just deliberately giving no detail. But I'm going to say being kidnapped by monkeys is the lie.
You're right. Well done. Although there's some basis in truth in that we were on safari in Serengeti, and it wasn't me. It was my little sister Alice, and she wasn't actually snatched by monkeys, but they got very close. And my mother would always tell them, this is why the story is a little bit chaotic, because my mother would always tell the story of, well, and Alice, and they nearly got her. But we all turned round and we shouted. And then in recent years, she was like, well, was it Alice or was it one of the others? I don't remember. So
was it a baboon? Was it a zebra?
Was it a vervet monkey? Was it a cheetah? No, exactly. But recently we found some photo albums of my baby sister, sort of on safari, and that was the occasion when it nearly happened, but it didn't happen.
I can't quite believe that. Oh, I was convinced the shipwreck was a lie for a little bit there. I'm glad that. All right. Kate, if you could tell your younger self one thing about being freelance, what would that be?
So I think probably the thing to say would be it's okay to muddle through, and you're doing a better job than you think you are. But those are quite sort of generic things that we all need to hear. But I thought maybe the piece that I would leave you with was something that I say to my kids all the time, which is from a poem called Desiderata. which was written a long time ago and is now a very cheesy poem that features, graces tea towels and chocolate boxes and things. But I happen to love it and find it to be very full of wisdom. And the two phrases from there, which I reach for regularly, I will say to my children, many fears are born of, and they will say, fatigue and loneliness. Shut up, mummy. But the line is, many fears are born of fatigue and loneliness. And I think that it's important to remember that when you feel horrible and awful and dreadful, it could just be because you're tired, and it could just be because you need a collective around you. You need a team around you. You need someone to listen to you and give you a helping hand. That's a sort of positive thing, I think, about other people. And then the other line from the Desiderata that I reach for is to sort of remind you of your place with respect to other people. Because I think often in freelancing, you're working so alone and comparing yourself to others. And the line is, if you compare yourself to others, you may become vain or bitter, for always there will be greater and lesser persons than yourself. And I just love that, because there are moments when you're like, my God, that person is rubbish. I'm amazing. And then there are equally those moments when you're like, everyone is all wonderful and I am awful. And just to be reminded that those two things are both a bit true and both not that true at all, and the fact that they kind of cancel each other out and become irrelevant and you should just do you and carry on, is very, very relevant, I think, to freelancing.
Wow, what a way to finish. And you can tell me you hung out at Radio 4 a lot. We've got poetry to kick off 2025. Kate, thank you so much. Go to beingfreelance.com, as there are for all of our guests. You can find show notes for this episode, transcription, and of course, links through so that you can check out what Kate's up to and her work and Feast Collective. And please do come join the community. There's a big enough draw there for being surrounded by other people, surely, in what Kate said. So why not join the Being Freelance community as well? You can check that out as well at the website. But for now, Kate, thank you so much and all the best being freelance.
Thank you so much, Steve. That was so much fun. Good luck.
That's it. We're done for another one. She was a lot of fun. So much wisdom as well. Thank you, Kate. Make sure you're subscribed or following whatever the lingo is, wherever you get this podcast. And please do share it with other people. You might think everybody knows about it, but trust me, they don't. So if you share it online, on social media, or perhaps in a group that you're in, or with other freelancers when you meet them in person, that would mean a lot as well. And yeah, tell me what you think about the podcast. If you're not already getting the Being Freelance emails, sign up for those, hit reply, leave comments wherever I've posted about it. It's always good to hear what you think about the conversations. I'll see you for another one in a couple of weeks from now. You have a great week being freelance.